Okay, things to remember generally for the writing task one, give no opinions. I guess I've already included this before. Oh, no need to reiterate. I've said it already earlier. Okay, so now let's have your bar graph. So the line graph is quite different from your bar graph, although there are instances that your bar graph and your line graph are of the same approaches. Okay, so your bar graph is, or it's also known as a bar chart or bar diagram. It is used to compare data among categories, so it may be horizontal or vertical, and it has two axes. So just like your line graph, it has y and x axis. So on a vertical bar graph, as shown above, the horizontal axis shows the data categories. Okay. So there are different types of bar graphs. So if in the line graph you have one line, two line, and then multi-line, for the bar graph you also have pure bar graph, bar with line graph approach, and then bar with pie chart approach. But in your introduction, if you're going to describe the graph, don't say, even if it's a bar with line graph approach, don't say it's the bar with line graph approach shows the blah 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 blah. So don't say that. Okay, you just have to say the bar graph. But this is only for the purpose of discussion so that you will be able to understand and hit your task achievements correctly. Okay, so pure bar graph, bar with a line graph approach, and then bar with pie chart approach. So this is an example of a pure bar graph. Okay, it's just pure. It's not progressive. You only have the countries. So it's basically comparative. So you're going to compare them. So that's your pure bar graph. It's comparative. So you have here categories. You have countries. Okay, different countries of different values. So what should contain your overview for pure bar graph? Okay, remember you have your intro and then your overview. So what should contain your overview for this particular graph, the pure bar graph? First, you have to write the highest in ranking and then your lowest and then other relevant features. That's it. You just have to describe which one is the highest and which one is the lowest. And then if you see other relevant features, you can also include that in the overview. So here in the graph, in your overview, you can just talk about Europe, which has the highest figure, and you also have South America, the lowest. Okay. How do you write your body paragraph for your pure bar graph? So basically, you're just going to rank first. So here, you're going to rank. So if you're going to have the paper-based examination, it would be better if you write numbers here on the graph. So you can write anything on your paper actually because you've paid for that. Okay, so here you need to start with the highest. So this is your rank 1, Europe, rank 2, rank 3, 4, 5. So that's what you're going to do. Okay, and the ranking would actually help you to write your sentences in your body paragraph because the same order, their order or their ranking will be your basis as to which one will be your sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, 4, 5, and then the last. Okay, so you have the rank and then you have the cluster. Okay, but this one is only good if you have a lot of details. If you have a lot of data, then you can cluster or you can group them. Okay, but if you have only few data like this one, then there's no need for you to cluster because if you're gonna cluster them, then you will most likely be under lens. Okay, so you have to be flexible, of course. You need to be very flexible. You can't be rigid in your examination, especially for the writing. So you have to cluster, you have to group them according to their figures. But this is optional, it's case to case. But the ranking, it's very important in the comparison. Okay, you need to make the necessary comparisons because remember, your bar graph is comparative. So if you fail to compare, then you will most likely get low scores in the task achievement. So you have to compare whenever necessary. Okay, don't just rank because that's mechanical. So every time that you rank, there should be comparisons in between. Okay. The clustering, again, is optional. It's case to case. If you have a few data, no need. But if there are a lot, please cluster. Okay, so this is how you're going to compare the bar graph. You can use DAVRAP. Okay, you can use DAVRAP. Please memorize. This is an acronym that I created. I've been using this since I started teaching so that the students would have an easy time memorizing or okay, retaining or recalling. So you need to also have that kind of habit. You need to learn how to make mnemonics, shortcuts for you to remember them. So for this, if you're going to compare, you can use DAVRAP. So these are basically the fundamental operations in mathematics that we usually use. So you have sum, difference, average, range, approximation, and then fraction. So those are the meanings of um, that is what your DAVRAP represents for sum for S, difference, average, range, approximation, and then your fraction. So for sum, this is how you're going to write it. So for example, A and B's population equals that of C when combined. So these are the keywords equals that of when combined. The combined population, you can also write it this way. The combined population of A and B will almost equal that of C. For example, if it's not exactly the same with the if the total is not exactly the same with the value of another, then you can just use an approximation. Almost. Okay, so these are the terms to use when combined, when added, will have a total of or equal that of. Okay, that's for the sum. Aside from that, you also have some, by the way, this is just very rare, but if there's an opportunity, you need to take advantage, okay, because it will help you to get higher scores. And then you also have difference. This is the most common overused approach in the bar graph. So at least try to differ. You need to vary your vocabulary so that even if you're using the approach difference 3 times, 4 times, at least your vocabulary is not repetitive. Okay, so you have to vary as well. So if you have difference in paragraph 1, then maybe you can use disparity in another sentence or in another paragraph. And you also have discrepancy. So these are just the synonyms of difference. And please try also to describe what kind of difference do your figures illustrate or yeah, what kind of difference do they demonstrate? So is it minimal? Is it marginal, meager, dismal? So when you say minimal, marginal, meager, dismal, meaning it's just slight, slight. So this one, slight, slight, minimal, marginal, meager, dismal. If it's large, yeah, you need to also have right here large. Okay, light. Let me just change it. Let me add something. So you have large, huge. Okay, so that's how you're going to describe them. You need to describe as well if what kind of difference do they have. Okay. You can also use a range. This is one way for you to cluster, especially if you have many figures. So for example, A, B, C, and D are ranged from 20 million to 40 million. So no need for you to describe the figures for A, B, C, and D, but you just have to use range so that you have only two figures. Okay. Average also can be a possible approach. So A, B, C, and D have an average of 20 million, especially if it's very obvious. You can also have this way, A, B, C, D averaged at. So you just have to change your average to past tense and then you use at as your preposition. Or if it's not exactly it's not an exact figure, or if you're not sure as to the average, you can just make an approximation, having an approximate average. So that's how you do it. Approximation. So this one is just like the same with the other ones, but here you're gonna use approximations like above. Expenses of Mark, Jane, and Sam have almost identical figures, comma, all having above 200 pesos. So you need to find a commonality. By the way, for you to group or to cluster them, you need to find a commonality. What are the similarities of or between the figures? So here in the approximation, you can find their common number. So their common number is 200 pesos. They're all above. So this is your approximation. So you can use that as well. Fraction. Okay, this one is very important because it would probably impress your examiner. It would impress your examiner if you're able to use fractions, but you have to be very careful because sometimes if you're not really into mathematics or if you're not sure as to your computation, then it would lead to wrong interpretation. So make sure that you have the correct um, interpretation of your figures. But this one, if you're able to properly use the fraction, then I tell you, your examiner will really be impressed. Okay, so for example, you have assuming that your first in ranking is 80, 80, and then your second in ranking is 20, 20. Okay, so 20 is a quarter of, remember, it's one fourth, right? It's one fourth of 80. So you can just say that it's a quarter. Okay, so you can use a fraction for that. So these are the verbal translations. You have to memorize this. 10% below, you can use a fraction or small portion. 10%, a tenth. 20% a fifth. 25% a quarter. 30% almost a third. 33.3% a third. 40% two fifths. 50% half. 60% three fifths. 75% three quarters. 80% four fifths. 90% almost or a large proportion, and then of course you have 100, which is a whole or all. Okay, so here, by the way, don't use fraction if the graph is in percentage. Okay, don't use fraction as your to compare. Don't use fraction to compare if your graph is in percentage because the examiner will be confused. Okay, the examiner will be confused. So the only time that you will use fraction is if the figures are in non-percentage form. Okay, for example, kilometers, millions, billions, you can use fractions. But if it's just a percentage, please don't use this. Okay, it will be confusing. So this is an example of a bar with line graph approach. Remember, earlier you had your pure bar graph. Okay, this is a pure bar graph. It's just merely comparative. There's no progression. It's discrete. You need to separately discuss Europe from North America, from Asia, until blah, blah, blah. Okay. But here, it's progressive. It's progressive. You have time element 1861 to 2001, and that is progressive. Okay. So that's your indication. That's your indicator that it's a bar with line graph approach. So therefore, you can actually use your line graph vocabs here. And it's the same approach with line graph. Essentially, this is a line graph, but it's just presented in a bar form. Okay, so that's the difference. And you have to be very careful because sometimes, actually most of the time, your test provider would confuse you. The Cambridge will actually find a way that you can, will find a way for you to have low score in the writing. So probably they will be giving you a bar graph, but has actually a line graph approach. So you need to know how to identify if what kind of bar is that. Is it pure bar? Is it bar line? Is it bar pi? So this is an example of a bar with line graph approach. So what should contain your overview for the bar line? Just the same thing with your line graph. Overall trend, highest and lowest in rank, and then other important features. So very simple. Exactly the same with your line graph. But of course, in your introduction, you don't say bar line. The bar line presents. No, you don't say that. You just have to say the bar graph, okay? But the approach, the way that you approach your overview, even your body paragraph should be the same with the line graph. So this is a bar with pie chart approach. So if, of course, the pie chart is equal to 100%, right? It's a circumference. It's a circle totaling to 100%, 100. So this is an example of a pie chart approach. If you're going to add them all, if you're going to sum them up, it's a total of 100%. This one is just very rare, but just in case you encounter, at least you would know how to approach this, okay? So if it's a total of 100%, and of course it's in percentage, then automatically you have to use the pie chart approach, even if it's bar graph, okay? However, if it's not total of 100%, even if it's in percentage, then it's not a pie chart. Probably it's just bar graph. Okay, so what should contain your overview for bar pie charts? So you need to have the highest and then the lowest. Same thing actually with the pure bar. You need to have the highest, the lowest, and then other relevant features. And how to write your body paragraph? Same thing with your pure bar graph. It's just that here you have to write verbal translations. Okay, rank, cluster, compare, and then you have to write you need to add, when you describe your figures, you need to have verbal translations. Okay, so for verbal translations, you can use actually this one, the fraction here. This is the verbal translation. Okay, so just refer to this after the lecture. I'll be giving you this anyway, so you can still review. All right, so this is a sample essay of your bar graph. Here, it's in percentage form, but the question is this a pure bar graph? Is this a bar line? Is this a bar pie? So that should be the question that you should be asking yourself. Because if you just write directly and then assume that it's automatically a pure bar or automatically a bar pie when it's not, then everything that you have written will be useless. So okay, it will just be put into waste. So of course, we don't want that from happening. So as early as now, you have to practice identifying what kind of graph am I seeing. So you have to ask that. Okay, here, this is an example of, is this a bar pie? Do you have a total of 100%? Is it a total of 100%? No, no, no. Yeah, it's not. I guess. Is it? You have to double check. So you need to add them up to double check if it's a total of 100%, but most likely it's not. 9 plus 12 plus 40 plus 22, 38. No, it's not. It's more than 100%. So this is automatically a pure bar graph. Okay, it's automatically a pure bar graph. So remember, rank, cluster, compare. So you have to rank them. What's your rank 1? This one, rank 1, rank 2. These ones, you can cluster them. They're almost of the same number. And then, of course, these ones, you can also you can cluster them or you can have them separated, okay? Yeah, so that's how you're going to do it. You just have to rank, cluster, and then you compare. So for the comparison, of course, that should be indicated here in your body paragraphs. Okay, so let me just read the sample essay. So the bar graph illustrates the outcome of a survey about the purpose of adults taking up further education. So the data are expressed in percentage. So again, I wrote another sentence. actually love writing another sentence in the IDP format because it adds up to my words. Okay. It adds up to the word count. So that's it. But it's up to you if you're gonna use this or not. One line or one sentence will be enough. Okay, again, let's proceed to the overview. Very important. Don't forget to write that. If you fail to write an overview, automatic 4.0 in your task achievements. Overall, most of the respondents cited their interest in the subject as the primary motive for studying. So remember, you just have to write the highest and the lowest. Okay, so the highest here, the primary motive for studying is interest in the subject. That's the number one here, interest in subject. And then the lowest, meeting people, that's your lowest, 9%. However, is the least reason. So take note, there are no figures. No figures, no percentage, okay, only descriptions. And it should be general. Okay, so here you can use your transition. You can use this actually in detail as your transition if you're gonna start your body paragraph. Okay, you can use this as your default. Okay, in detail, inclination to the subject is the most stated factor, which recorded a significant proportion of 40%. Okay, so this one. Gaining qualifications came in next. So this is how I emphasize my ranking. So you can use these kind of terms. Came in next with a minimal 2% disparity with the former. So this one is already the comparison with a minimal 2% disparity with the former. So here I use difference as an approach to compare. Okay, then I proceed to the next part. Meanwhile, respondents who find it helpful for their recent job accounted to a considerable figure of 22%. Okay, so that's it. While the rest of the factors, so here I did not write anymore what those factors are because I don't like writing everything here, but I've still described them. I was still able to describe them. It's just that I did not write explicitly what those are. So you can just use this. While the rest of the factors have recorded significant figures, change of career and socialization with other people have only a fraction. So a fraction means a little or a small portion, with both having around 10%. So this one is an approximation with both having around 10%. So you're finding a commonality, which is 10%. They're both having around 10%. So this is a sample essay for your bar graph. So here's another one. So again, ask yourself, is it a pure bar, a bar line, or a bar pie? So this one exactly, or obviously, is a bar, pure bar. Okay, pure bar. So you're just going to merely compare them. The difference though here is that you have two bars, you have men and women, so you have two legends. So that's the confusing part there. How are you gonna paragraph them, or how will you write your body paragraph? So here what I did was my BP1, my body paragraph 1 was the one with higher figure generally. So you have men. They have generally higher figures all throughout among all the countries, and then you have women second, so from USA, and then you have until the rest of the world. So this one is a BP1 and then BP2 for women. So that's how you're gonna do it. It's just very simple when it comes to paragraphing. The challenge there is how you're gonna compare them, okay, or how are you gonna stretch out, especially that you only have few data. So the bar graph compares the data about the number of men and women from different areas who are using the internet. So the population is expressed in percentage. Again, my favorite part, I'm using here a second sentence just to stretch out. Okay, overall, same thing. I've been using this, if you notice, I've been using the same transitions. Okay, here. Meanwhile, Europe recorded to have the most male, so on and so forth. So With regard to men, so this one also is a transition. By the way, when you say with regard, you don't add s. It should be singular. With regard to men, Europe has the largest proportion with 80%, shared a marginal discrepancy. So take note, try to, if you're going to use difference, you have to um, describe what kind of difference is it. Okay, USA came in third. Can take note of the ranking at above 60%. And then another transition comparatively, women have blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's how you're going to do your bar graph. It looks simple actually, but bar graph for me is the hardest, I believe. Among the four graphs, the bar, line, pie, and then the tabular graph, bar graph is the most difficult. But I believe that's relative, so it can be easy for you, it can be difficult for me, or it can be the other way around. So it depends. As long as you're able to study the vocabulary and then the approaches, then definitely you can answer. You can definitely write a good output for this particular task. All right, so that's it for your writing task 1 and writing task 2. No, writing task 1, line graph and bar graph.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just be providing you the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So
Thank you.
if I'm done with the editing or with the recording, then I'll just send it to you because I'll probably upload it on YouTube so that if ever you have questions or you want to hear again the discussion, then you can have it within your available time. Okay. So if you have questions, you can just address it maybe via Messenger. You can just approach me personally about that. All right. Line graph is the easiest actually. It's the easiest compared to bar. It's easier compared to bar graph. And line graph is the basic because if you don't memorize your vocabulary in the line graph, then you will also be having a hard time in your bar, in your pie, and in your tabular graph. So please memorize your line graph vocabs. That's very important. Okay. And same thing, the approaches and everything. So the task one is, although it's just 33.3%, but it's advantageous if you're able to get more than 7. It would be much easier actually. It's much easier for you to get more than 7 in your task 1 compared to your task 2. Yeah. If you are just familiar with the vocabs, the approaches, if you have just interpreted the graph correctly, then it's very possible for you to get even more than 7. But the task 2, it's also advantageous because it is twice as much as your task 1, but it's quite dangerous, especially if your task 2 is not good. So it will really pull down your total band score for the writing. Okay. But in your actual exam, please answer first your task 2. Before you write your task 1, write first your task 2 because that is 66.6%. Okay. I have a lot of students who were not able to finish their task 1, yet they still got 7. Some of them even got 7.5. Even if they fail to finish their task 1, that's probably because they have good task 2. Okay. So that's advantages on their end. So I hope that you will also have the same, but please finish both task 1 and task 2 within the time. Again, you need to reach the minimum number of words, 150 for task 1 and 150 for task 250 for task 2. All right, so that's it for this afternoon. Okay, the line graph. So for the next 2 hours, I'd like you to write, and you can just send it to me